It all started with a mistake. A call made in the silence of the night when fate decided to disguise itself as coincidence. On the other end, there was a cold, steady voice, the kind that sounds like it knows more than it's saying. Gabriel never imagined that this accident would lead him to Isabella, the most feared, and perhaps the loneliest woman in the country. And in that unlikely encounter between power and vulnerability, something was born, not the perfect kind of love, but the kind that comes to set fire to whatever's left in ruins. Night fell over Snowbento like a heavy veil of rain and electricity. Gabriel Torres, his eyes tired and his hands stained with grease and solder, worked in silence. The phone screen flickered, casting a cold light across his face. An ordinary face, but with something in the eyes, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul. Outside, the distant sound of a train seemed to announce that something was about to change. He took a deep breath and dialed an old number, one buried in his phone's memory. Just wanted to confirm an old order, maybe fix a technical mistake. But what came from the other end wasn't a simple answer. It was a voice, a woman's voice, cold, metallic. "Who are you? And why are you calling this number?" The sound cut through the phone like a blade. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Gabriel tried to explain, stumbling over his words, but the voice shut him down. "You made a mistake," she said, pausing as if studying him from afar. "And now I need to know who you are." The silence that followed was almost tangible, heavier than any threat. He felt his heartbeat quicken, without knowing why. The call ended abruptly. The dull click echoed through the small apartment, blending with the buzz of the lights. He stood there, frozen, staring at the phone like it had just shown him something he wasn't supposed to see. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, fear whispered something he didn't want to admit. None of this was just an accident. That night, Gabriel dreamed of the voice. He woke up drenched in sweat, her words still ringing in his head. It was as if she had entered the maze of his thoughts and refused to leave. The night dragged on endlessly, and when morning finally came, the world felt different, quieter, more alert. During the day, he tried to shrug it off. He worked, met clients, fixed cracked screens. But every time the phone buzzed, a chill ran down his spine, as if the call could return at any second. Deep down he knew there was something wrong with that voice, something that seemed to know the parts of himself he tried to hide. 3 days later, the first message arrived. "No name, no greeting. You live in Snowbento, right?" He frowned, glanced around his small apartment, and felt the weight of being watched. He tried to laugh it off, but the smile wouldn't come. Another message followed minutes later. "You tend to work late, don't you?" His heart raced. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching him. He moved to the window, peering into the empty street. The city slept, but he couldn't anymore. The feeling of being watched followed him even in the mirror's reflection. And with every new notification, something inside him whispered that this story wouldn't end with a simple block. Sometimes he thought about replying. Other times, he just left the phone on the table, afraid to even touch it. Every vibration made his chest tighten. It felt like that first mistake had opened an invisible door, and now someone was walking on the other side, determined to cross it. On the 5th night, while trying to convince himself it was all paranoia, the phone rang again. Same sequence of numbers, same knot in his stomach. He answered. On the other end, the sound of wind, and a slow, steady breath. "Do you sleep with the window open, Gabriel?" the voice whispered, soft as poison. He froze. His name.
She knew his name.
His whole body tensed. His eyes darted to the window, swaying in the night breeze. His heart pounded so hard, it almost betrayed his fear. But there was something about that voice, something that drew him in, a dangerous mix of threat and fascination. In the days that followed, He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. A black car parked in the same spot every night. Footsteps in the hallway. The sound of the elevator rising when no one should be there. The city seemed to be watching him through unseen eyes. And with every new ring of his phone, his world felt smaller. Yes, there was fear. But there was also curiosity. Who was she? Why was she watching him? And why did the sound of her voice make him feel alive in a strange, unexplainable way? He tried to convince himself to move on, but the harder he tried, the deeper he sank. It was like trying to wake up from a dream that had already become too real. On impulse, Gabriel typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came within seconds. "That's not the right question." He took a deep breath, waiting. "The right one is, why did you call me that night?" His mind went blank. He didn't even know anymore. From that moment on, nothing felt like coincidence. Every knock on the door, every shadow in the hallway carried a new meaning. His mistake had crossed the line between technology and something else, something he couldn't explain. That woman wasn't a coincidence. She was fate calling him back. One afternoon, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Gabriel froze, clutching his phone. The doorbell rang. Once. Twice. When he opened the door, there was no one there, just a single envelope, white and spotless, resting on the floor. Inside, a handwritten note. "Coincidences don't exist, Mr. Torres." The air seemed to vanish from the room. The handwriting was neat, elegant, almost artistic, but carried a cold precision. He turned the paper over and over, looking for clues, an address, anything, nothing. Only a faint, delicate perfume lingered, one that would stay in his memory for a very long time. That night was the first time Gabriel slept with the lights on, the second and third nights too. And still the fear didn't fade. On the contrary, it grew, spreading through his body like a quiet fever. Something inside him whispered that the moment he turned off the phone, she would appear. And maybe a part of him wanted her to. The sound of rain returned, and the reflection of the wet city shimmered in the window. He looked at his phone and froze. The screen lit up by itself. No notifications. Just a name on the display. Unknown number. Isabella. His breath caught. And in that instant he knew. The mistake had just become destiny. The following days dragged on like the echo of something he couldn't erase. Her voice stayed trapped in Gabriel's mind like a whisper that refused to die. There was something in her tone, a blend of power and melancholy, as if every word were a cursed secret searching for rest. The city felt slower, the sounds more distant, and the silence heavier, filled with things he didn't want to hear. He found himself replaying that call over and over, as if every memory were an invitation to danger. While he worked between shattered screens and burned circuits, he could hear that voice beneath the hum of the machines. He tried to ignore it, but it came back. "Who are you, Gabriel?" The words repeated softly, mercilessly, like an inverted prayer. The strangest part was how familiar she sounded. As if they had met before, in another time, another life. And no matter how hard he tried to push the thought away, the desire to hear her again was stronger than the fear. That night, the first message hit him like a punch to the chest. "You live in Snowbento, right?" He froze, heart pounding, eyes scanning the open window and the empty street below. Minutes later, another message. "You tend to work late." That wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching. Someone knew too much. He got up, shut the curtains, and stood there, holding his breath, realizing his life had just been invaded by something he couldn't see. The night dragged on, and when dawn approached, the phone vibrated again. He answered without thinking. On the other end, the wind, and a slow, almost hypnotic breath. "Do you sleep with the window open, Gabriel?" the voice asked, soft as venom. Hearing his name like that broke something inside him. Yes, it was fear. But there was something else too. Something he didn't want to admit. Curiosity, fascination, maybe even the beginning of desire. In the days that followed, life became a silent game of surveillance. Gabriel could feel her eyes on him, even when he was alone. The streets seemed to watch him back. The lights flickered in rhythm with his heartbeat. A black car started appearing at the corner of his building, same time, every night, with windows too dark to see through. He began noting the details, the hours, the sounds, the patterns. As if he were trying to decode an invisible message, unsure whether he really wanted to understand. One of those nights, the phone vibrated again. The message was brief, but unsettling. "Nice blue shirt. It suits your hurry." Gabriel looked down at himself and felt a chill crawl up his spine. He was wearing grey. The message seemed to come from another time, another version of his life. Or maybe it was proof that she knew far more than he thought. But by then, fear no longer pushed him away. Fear had become company. Each notification felt like a pulse of adrenaline, a reminder that something far greater than him was already in motion. He started talking to himself, asking the air who she was, why she had chosen him, what she wanted from him. Sometimes he thought it was a trap, sometimes a test. And in the quietest hours, when the world slept, he wondered if what he felt was danger or destiny. One afternoon, he found a note slipped under his door. White paper, neat handwriting, a faint trace of perfume. "Coincidences don't exist, Mr. Torres." The simple sentence made his whole body shiver. He looked around, searching for movement, a shadow. Anything. Nothing. Just the dense silence of an apartment that no longer felt like his own. From that moment on, he understood. The voice wasn't just in his mind. It was around him. The next night, the rain came hard, hitting the window with an almost hypnotic rhythm. He closed his eyes and heard the voice again, but this time, inside his head. Closer. Intimate. "You heard me before you met me," she whispered between the thunder. Gabriel's eyes snapped open, his body covered in cold sweat. He felt watched, not with hatred, but with a kind of curious fascination, as if he were part of some emotional experiment conducted from afar. Loneliness turned into presence. The apartment, once small and suffocating, now felt like a stage for something he couldn't understand. Sometimes, when he looked in the mirror, he saw a shadow that wasn't his. Other times, he caught the faint scent of a woman who had never entered that place. There was a strange tenderness in it all, as if fear itself were being carefully sculpted into something that resembled love. Then the voice returned, not through a call, but through an audio message, only 5 seconds long. The sound of footsteps, a glass being set on a table. A quiet sigh. Then the whisper, "Don't run." The words sounded like both a warning and a promise. Gabriel leaned against the wall, his heart pounding, realizing something was about to change. He no longer wanted to run. Part of him, though he'd never admit it, wanted her to come. In the days that followed, silence became his closest companion. He spoke little, slept less, and every noise made him turn his head. But when the phone rang, fear turned into anticipation. The mistake of that call had become an invisible thread, binding him to that mysterious woman, a forbidden connection born out of the unknown, pulsing between danger and desire. Until one moonless night, the phone lit up on its own. The screen showed a single message. "You didn't dial the wrong number, Gabriel. You opened the right door." He stood still, feeling his blood move slowly through his veins. The glow of the blue light trembled in his eyes, and his breath became too loud for the silence around him. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a chase. It was a calling. And when the distant sound of an engine echoed down the street, he knew she was close. Fate had already dialed again. Night fell early that day, heavy and starless, as if even the sky were waiting for something to happen. Gabriel sat at the table, the same phone in his hands, the same screen glowing, the same name displayed on it, Isabella. The short vibration of the device was the last sound before the world changed. 3 firm knocks echoed on the door. It wasn't the timid knock of a neighbor or the impatient pounding of a bill collector. It was something else. Deliberate, precise, almost ritualistic. He stood up slowly, his heart beating like an uneven clock. As he turned the doorknob, the air seemed to shift in density. And there, standing on the threshold between fear and curiosity, was her, Isabella D'Amato, the woman behind the voice. The enigma that had haunted his nights now had a face, and what a face it was. Tall, flawless posture, a perfectly tailored black suit, and eyes sharp enough to dismantle any defense. Behind her, 2 silent men dressed in black stood still, watching without blinking. She entered without asking permission, as if she already owned the place. Her gaze swept across the small apartment, the tools on the table, the closed curtains, the faint scent of metal and dust. The silence between them stretched tight, ready to snap. "I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Torres." Her voice, in person, was even more powerful. Deep, steady, with a melancholy that didn't belong to someone who carried that much control. Gabriel tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if her presence had muted the entire world. She walked to the center of the room, her heels striking the floor in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Her eyes scanned everything, the coffee stains on the table, the pile of phones, the scattered wires. There was something in her expression, a strange mix of dominance and sorrow. "You called a number that was supposed to be dead," she said calmly. His skin prickled. I thought it belonged to an old client." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with the precision of someone who had learnt to distrust even silence. "And yet, you kept talking." For a moment, her gaze softened. It was brief, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. A flicker of pain slipping through the cracks of her armor. Gabriel saw it. There was humanity buried somewhere inside her, wounded, restrained, dangerous. "I didn't know," he murmured. "But now you do," she replied. And in that brief exchange they both understood that nothing would ever be the same after that night. The air in the room grew heavier. He could smell her perfume, subtle, expensive, jasmine laced with the scent of wet night. Every breath was a battle between the instinct to step back and the inability to look away. Isabella moved toward the window, drew the curtain aside, and stared into the street below. "You're a curious man, Mr. Torres. I just fix phones." "No one calls the dead by accident," she said, still facing the glass. The rain began to tap against the window again, and for a moment the world seemed suspended. The 2 guards remained outside, leaving the stage to just the 2 of them. Isabella turned slowly, crossed her arms, and studied him as if trying to decode a message written in his eyes. "You know what intrigues me the most?" she began. "The way you speak. Calm, but certain. It's the same tone he used to have." Gabriel frowned, not understanding right away. "He who?" he asked, and when her eyes glimmered under the dim light, he knew he was about to cross an invisible line. "My husband," she said. Her voice cracked, but it was still strong. "The number you dialed, it was his." A long silence filled the room. He didn't know what to say, and she didn't seem to expect an answer. She walked to the table and ran her fingers over a dismantled phone. "Curious. Fate always finds ways to remind me that nothing ever really dies." The way she said fate sounded more like a curse than a belief. Gabriel tried to hide his unease, but it was impossible. The woman standing before him didn't seem to belong to reality. She had the kind of presence carried by someone who's lived too long among ghosts. "It was just a mistake," he said, his voice trembling. "Nothing is just a mistake, Mr. Torres," she replied, staring straight into his eyes. "Sometimes chance is only the disguise of the inevitable," and in that moment he felt the space between them shrink. Not physically, but emotionally. As if some invisible force were pulling them closer, against both their wills. Time seemed to stretch inside that room. Isabella set her bag on the table, opened it slowly, and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was an old photograph, her and a man smiling. He worked with technology too. He was good with secrets, she said, gazing at the picture for a few seconds before tucking it away again. And he was killed by one of them. Her words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Gabriel felt his heart pound harder, not just from fear, but from something harder to name. Empathy. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "Because you called," she said simply. "And I don't believe in coincidences." Her gaze softened, though a wall still stood between them. "When I heard your voice, I knew something was off." The same tone, the same calmness, as if death had decided to return what it once took from me. He stayed quiet, and the distant rumble of thunder filled the silence between their words. Isabella stepped closer. The air grew warmer. "You shouldn't be involved in this," she whispered. "But now you are." And before he could answer, she turned to leave. "Tomorrow, someone will come for you. We have more to discuss." Her words sounded like both a command and a warning. She stopped at the door, looked back over her shoulder, and said only, "Don't turn off your phone." When the door closed, the air seemed to vanish from the apartment. Gabriel stood frozen for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her scent still lingered in the air. Her presence still vibrated through the room. The mistake now had a face, a name, and a purpose. Isabella D'Amato, the woman whose voice had haunted his mind, was now walking through his thoughts with the same precision she used to walk across the rain-soaked streets. Outside, the rain had turned into a storm. But inside him, something else was falling, a feeling he couldn't name. Maybe fear. Maybe fascination. Maybe the first spark of a love that was never meant to exist. As the lights flickered and the clock struck midnight, Gabriel realized that, somehow, fate had answered his call. And from that moment on, he wasn't sure he ever wanted to hang up. The next morning, Gabriel woke to the muffled sound of wet tires on the street. The sun tried to break through the heavy clouds, but seemed to give up every time it tried. The night before still pulsed in his head, the perfume, the voice, the gaze that seemed to measure every beat of his heart. Isabella D'Amato. The name echoed like a brand burned into him. He searched it. Just typing a few letters was enough for the entire world to answer, with fear. Her face appeared in old headlines, blurred photos, stories no one dared to say out loud. Head of the D'Amato family, widow, ruthless, untouchable. Gabriel scrolled through the screen, feeling the blood drain from his body with every line he read. Isabella was the kind of woman the world respected by force. She had inherited an empire after the brutal death of her husband, Enzo D'Amato, a man known for elegance and cruelty in equal measure. They said his murder had been an inside job, and that, since then, the widow had ruled with an iron hand and sleepless eyes. The photo on the screen showed the same face he had seen the night before, the same calm, deadly stare, the same unshakable control. But there was something beyond the headlines, something his instincts caught onto. Isabella wasn't just power and danger, there was pain in those eyes. An old, almost sacred loneliness buried beneath the expensive suit and the feared name. Gabriel wondered how many secrets a woman had to carry to turn her vulnerability into a crown, and how much blood an empire had to drink to keep standing. The buzz of his phone pulled him out of his thoughts. A short message. "Get ready. The car's on its way." He didn't reply. He just looked out the window and saw the same black sedan from the night before pulling up slowly in front of the building. For a moment he thought about running, but his fear came tangled with a curiosity too strong to resist. He walked down the stairs slowly, his heart pounding like a distant drum. The car drove through narrow streets, slick with rain and fog. The driver didn't say a word. He just kept going until the city lights disappeared behind them. On the horizon, a mansion surrounded by tall walls emerged from the mist like a ship made of stone. The iron gates opened with a deep, metallic groan, and for the first time, Gabriel realized he was stepping into another world, one where fear and silence made the rules. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and expensive perfume. Paintings with stern faces watched him as if judging the presence of an outsider. Isabella waited at the top of the stairs, dressed in black again, her hair tied back, her expression colder. "Punctual," she said without smiling. He just nodded. She descended slowly, the sound of her heels echoing through the hall like the ticking of a clock. "You know who I am now, don't you?" she asked. He nodded again. "Then you understand why I can't believe in coincidences." She led him into a large room with tall windows and heavy curtains. In the center stood a table covered in documents, maps, old photographs. Gabriel recognized the number he had dialed scribbled in the corner of one of them. "It was my husband's number," Isabella said softly, her fingers brushing the paper. "No one has called it in years. Until you." The silence that followed felt alive. Gabriel wanted to explain again, but she lifted her hand, asking for calm. "I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Torres. Coincidence is just a message in disguise." Her eyes reflected something between faith and madness. "When you spoke to me, your voice reminded me of him. Identical. The same tone. The same pause before saying the name. Do you understand what that means?" He shook his head, confused, and she gave a faint smile. Sad, almost human. Isabella turned her back to him and walked toward the window. Outside, the garden looked like a cemetery of statues. "Enzo died at a dinner," she said, her voice steady, without tremor. "His wine was poisoned, and the man who served it vanished." She turned her face, her gaze slicing through his. "Since then, there are things I can't erase. Voices, scents, memories that refuse to stay buried." Her tone shifted between steel and sorrow, as if she were speaking both to him and to the ghost she carried. Gabriel listened quietly, trying to understand what truly drove her. Isabella was a labyrinth of secrets, and he was already trapped inside it. "Did the police ever find who did it?" he asked, almost without thinking. She let out a bitter laugh. "The police? I am the law here, Mr. Torres. And sometimes, even the law has to get dirty to stay alive." The laugh died quickly, as if it wasn't meant to escape. She stepped closer again, slowly, her eyes locked on his. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. "I don't know what I believe anymore." "You should," she murmured, "because you just walked into mine." Her words carried something he couldn't define. Power, maybe. Or loneliness. Or both. The air between them wavered between threat and confession. Isabella, even as she interrogated him, looked at him with something close to genuine curiosity. Gabriel noticed the details, the faint tremor in her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind of weariness only guilt could bring. The woman behind the name was more than the ruler of an empire. She was someone who had lost everything trying to keep what little remained. She walked toward the fireplace, and for an instant the flames lit her face in a way that completely disarmed him. "Do you know what power is, Mr. Torres?" she asked, staring at the fire. "It's the art of surviving your own regret." Gabriel felt a tightening in his chest. He didn't answer. There was no answer to give. That night, when the driver took him back home, he knew something inside him had changed. The fear was no longer just fear, it had turned into curiosity, fascination, desire. The voice that once haunted him now seemed to be calling him closer. Deep down, he knew the wrong call was no longer an accident. Isabella D'Amato was no longer a distant mystery. She was a presence growing inside him, silent, inevitable. As the car disappeared into the rain, Gabriel looked out the window and saw her figure at the top of the stairs, watching him leave. No wave, no goodbye. Just that steady, solitary gaze. And he felt, with a strange certainty, that her eyes would follow him for the rest of his life. Night fell again over Snow Bento, and with it came the sound of an engine stopping in front of Gabriel's building. He was already expecting it. There was something about her punctuality that scared him, and yet drew him in. The black car, the tinted windows, the same silent driver. The back door opened without warning, and a familiar voice, deep and calm, said simply, "Get in." He obeyed without hesitation, as if he already knew that resisting her was useless. The drive lasted a little over an hour, but time inside the car felt elastic. No one spoke. Only the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of rain against the glass filled the silence. When the gates opened again, the mansion emerged between trees and mist, towering, immovable, like a memory that refused to die. Isabella was waiting at the top of the staircase as if she had never left. Her gaze was the same, composed, calculated, almost clinical, but this time there was something new, a faint shadow of curiosity. She led him into a vast hall, lit by an old chandelier and the soft flicker of candles lined across a long table. The setting looked prepared for something between a confession and an execution. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Gabriel obeyed, his heart pounding, his body torn between fear and fascination. Isabella circled him slowly, like a predator studying its prey. Yet there was a strange gentleness in her control, as if something inside her was fighting against its own instinct. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because I called the wrong number." She smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing is wrong when it happens at the right time." She stopped behind him, her voice close to his ear. "I need to understand what you truly wanted when you called. It was just a mistake. There are no mistakes in stories like mine. Mr. Torres, only signs." Her words lingered in the air like a verdict. She moved around the table and sat across from him. The silence between them felt like its own presence. Gabriel tried to appear calm, but her eyes pierced through any attempt at disguise. "Do you know what caught my attention?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "Your voice. You sound like him." She didn't need to say the name. Him, the dead husband. The absence that still haunted those walls. Isabella lowered her gaze for a moment, and when she looked up again, something had shifted. The mask slipped, just a little. There was pain there. Real, raw pain. "I spent years trying to forget the sound of his voice. But when you spoke to me that night, everything came back." Gabriel swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to remind you, but you did." Her eyes drifted for a moment, and the hardness that usually armored her gave way to something human, fragile. "He betrayed me before he died. And still my heart refuses to understand that betrayal should be enough to stop loving." The confession fell between them like silent lightning. Gabriel felt a knot tighten in his chest. Isabella stood, walked to the window, and turned her back to him. "Do you know what it's like to wake up every day surrounded by people who pretend to be loyal? To sleep beside weapons and false smiles? And still hold the empire together, because that's what they expect from you?" Her voice faltered for only a moment, before regaining its strength, proud, unbroken. He watched her quietly, unsure what to do. Any word would feel too small. A silhouette, against the dim light of the storm, looked like a living painting. Powerful, broken, eternal. "Isabella," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't say my name like you know me." She turned toward him, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You have no idea what it means to be me." The tension between them was almost tangible. The air seemed to hum. She leaned forward, hands on the table, her face just inches from his. "You have no right to walk into my life, or to remind me of what I've buried." He didn't answer. There was no defense, no logic to cling to. What existed between them wasn't reason, it was fate. And fate never asks for permission. Isabella stepped back, took a deep breath, and regained control. "I needed to be sure of something." She crossed the room to a side cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small box. From it, she took a recorder. She pressed play. Gabriel's voice filled the room, the recording of their first call. "Who are you?" he said. "You made a mistake," her recorded voice replied. Then silence. Isabella stopped the recording and looked at him. "I've listened to this dozens of times. You know what's strange? The fear in your voice. It was the same fear my husband had the night he died." The words hit like a blade. Gabriel froze, speechless. Isabella noticed. Fear doesn't lie, Mr. Torres, and that's why I trust you, because fear makes you human. She sat again, calmer now, though her eyes stayed sharp. I haven't trusted anyone in years, but something about you breaks that. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. The silence stretched until it became something almost peaceful. Gabriel could see it now. Beneath the armor of control, there was someone tired of fighting. Isabella studied him with the kind of curiosity reserved for an unexpected reflection. I want to understand why you showed up now, she said. Maybe because I needed to remember what it feels like to believe in someone again. The words hung in the air, heavy with double meaning. For a brief moment, power and fear intertwined into something neither of them should feel. The rain outside softened into a distant rhythm like the score of an old film. Isabella looked away, rebuilding her walls. Dinner's over. The driver will take you home. But before he could leave, she stepped closer. Her voice came low, husky, almost fragile. You spoke with his voice. But you're not him, and maybe that's what frightens me most. Gabriel didn't respond. He just looked into her eyes and for the first time saw what truly lived behind the name. Not the boss. Not the legend. Just a woman power had left far too alone. When the door closed behind him, he understood that this interrogation had never been about guilt. It was about memory. And from that moment on, he knew he'd never hear his own voice again without thinking of hers. The rain was still falling when Gabriel returned to the mansion. He didn't know if he had been invited or summoned, but his body moved as if guided by something stronger than his own will. The entrance was quiet, the lights dimmer than usual. His footsteps echoed over the cold marble until, at the end of the hall, he saw her, Isabella, sitting alone by the fireplace. No tailored suit this time, just a dark blouse and her hair loose. The image was almost intimate, as if power itself had decided to rest for one night. "You came back," she said, without turning her head. Her voice sounded different now, less steel, more flesh. Gabriel moved closer, feeling the warmth of the fire blend with her scent. "You sent for me." "I did," she replied, her eyes fixed on the flames. "But I'm not sure I should have." The flicker of the fire danced in her eyes, and for a moment he saw exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that time can't heal. "There's something you need to know," she continued, her tone lower now, almost a whisper. "Since Enzo died, there's been a shadow over everything. Someone inside my own family betrayed him. And I still don't know who." The words came out steady, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. "Since that night, I haven't trusted anyone. Every smile feels like a threat, every gesture a trap. I don't sleep. I just survive." Gabriel stayed silent, watching her. It was strange how, even in her brokenness, she still seemed indestructible. Isabella took a deep breath and lifted her gaze. "When you appeared, when I heard your voice, something in me faltered. I thought it was anger or fear. But it wasn't. It was memory." She paused, weighing her words before letting them go. "You reminded me what it feels like to trust. And I don't know how to handle that." The silence between them felt like a minefield. Every breath could set something off. "Do you trust me?" he asked carefully. Isabella smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I don't trust anyone, Gabriel. But for some reason I can't explain, I trust you." The words came out like both a confession and a sentence. His chest tightened, not because of what she said, but because of everything she couldn't bring herself to say. She stood and walked to a table, picking up a glass of wine. "My husband believed that power keeps us safe. I believed it too, until I realized that power is just a more sophisticated form of loneliness." She handed him the glass, her fingers brushing his for a brief second. The touch was fleeting, but enough to change the air. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Torres, but I am, and that's why everything is about to change." The words sounded like a prophecy. Isabella took a few steps back, looking at him as if trying to decide what to do with a mistake too beautiful to erase. "Do you know what's worse than being feared?" she asked. "Being remembered only for the fear you caused." Her tone wavered between confession and sorrow, and Gabriel realized that beneath all the ice, there was a woman on the edge of breaking. He stepped closer. Maybe you can still be remembered for something else. She let out a quiet laugh. For what? For loving again. For living again. Isabella looked away, as if the words had struck deeper than any wound. Living, she repeated almost mockingly. People like me don't live, Gabriel. We just control time until it runs out. Silence filled the room again. The fire cracked softly, its rhythm echoing their hearts. Isabella rested her hands on the back of the chair and spoke without facing him. The day I trusted someone, my husband died. And the day I forgave, I lost everything I had left. Then she turned to him, finally meeting his gaze. So tell me, why should I trust you? Gabriel moved closer, step by step, until the space between them was almost gone. Because I don't want anything from you, he said. Not your power, not your empire. I just want to understand why fate put me in front of you. Isabella looked at him, as if trying to read a lie, but his eyes were clear, disarmed, honest. For an instant, the fortress inside her cracked. She drew a long, slow breath, her chest rising as her gaze drifted out of focus. I loved him, you know, even after the betrayal, even after his death. And I think I still do. But not him, what he stood for. The promise of not being alone. Her voice broke at the end. And Gabriel knew that was the truth no one had ever heard from her. Without a word, he reached out his hand. Isabella hesitated, but didn't pull away. The touch was simple, human, without intent, just presence. For a second, she closed her eyes, and the woman the world feared looked like someone simply tired of being strong. Careful, Mr. Torres, she whispered, opening her eyes slowly. Some wounds start bleeding again when you touch them. Then let them bleed, he replied, almost without thinking. Isabella looked at him, startled, but said nothing. The silence between them thickened, growing hotter, heavier, like fire with no air to burn. When she finally stepped back, it was slow, careful, like someone retreating from the edge of an abyss that still called her name. You should go, she said, regaining her tone of command, though her voice no longer had the same strength. And you should stop running, he answered. Isabella held his gaze for several long seconds, as if deciding whether to destroy him or trust him. At last, she said only, Maybe one day you'll learn that being close to me isn't a privilege. It's a warning. Gabriel smiled, not with bravery, but surrender. He knew he was already trapped. Not by her guards, but by what he was beginning to feel. And when he left the room, carrying the echo of her last words, he knew with certainty that this woman would drag him somewhere where love and destruction walked hand in hand. As the car carried him home through the storm, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her silhouette framed by the window. The firelight from the hearth glowed in Isabella's eyes like a secret she wasn't ready to confess. But her gaze said it all. The empire was still hers, but her heart, not entirely. The following days passed like a fog, slow, heavy, suspended between fear and desire. Gabriel began returning to the mansion often, always under some technical excuse, checking systems, restoring files, reviewing security flaws. But both of them knew it wasn't about work. It was about presence. About the strange calm that settled whenever they were in the same room. Isabella watched every movement he made, and he, in turn, learned to read her silences. They didn't speak much, but when their eyes met, there was something there that even her power couldn't control. One afternoon he was in her office, surrounded by screens and code. Isabella entered without warning, the sound of her heels echoing across the wooden floor. Everything in order? She asked. Almost. She stepped closer, stopping behind him to look over his shoulder at the screen. Her perfume surrounded him like a memory. And what if I told you some secrets weren't meant to be uncovered? She murmured. Gabriel turned his head, and their faces were inches apart. Then I'd tell you that every secret exists because someone tried to hide the wrong truth. Isabella held his gaze, too long to be accidental. She stepped back, but the air between them stayed warm. You're too bold for a technician, Mr. Torres. and you're too human for a legend, Mrs. D'Amato. The answer made her smile for the first time. Short, almost a mistake, but real. You should be afraid of me. Maybe I am, but I think that's part of the problem. The conversation ended there, but the words lingered in the air long after. In the days that followed, work became their excuse. Isabella called him over for trivial reasons, asking him to check systems that were already working perfectly. He pretended not to notice, and she pretended she wasn't calling out of loneliness. Their bond grew in silence, disguised as routine. There was something in his simplicity that disarmed her. Gabriel didn't see her as the queen of crime, but as a woman trying to remember who she was before she lost everything. One night, during a power outage, the two of them ended up trapped in the same hallway. The mansion was swallowed by darkness, and the distant hum of failing generators echoed through the halls. Gabriel held a flashlight, the trembling beam tracing her face in soft shadows. "Are you afraid of the dark?" he asked, half smiling. "The dark never scared me," she replied, her voice steady. "What scares me is what it reveals." Her words were firm, but her eyes betrayed the tremor underneath. The light flickered again, and for a brief moment her face was so close he could see the reflection of a distant fire dancing in her eyes. "You should have hung up that night," she said softly, her voice low. "But now, it's too late." Gabriel didn't answer. He just stood there, still, understanding that some lines aren't meant to be crossed, only felt. When the lights came back on, the distance between them rebuilt itself like a wall. But inside, something irreversible had already happened. Isabella tried to hide it behind her usual composure, but it was pointless. In the days that followed, small cracks began to show. A pause in her gaze, a slower movement, a question she didn't need to ask. She was no longer the woman of iron in front of him, and that both infuriated and freed her. On a rainy afternoon, he walked into her office and found her silently watching the storm through the window. "It's been raining for days," she said, without turning. "Feels like the sky's tired of holding it all in." Gabriel approached quietly. "Or maybe it's just learning how to cry." Isabella glanced at him, her expression softening. "You talk like someone who still believes in love, and you talk like someone who's afraid of it." She looked away, and the silence that followed felt like an almost kiss, suspended, waiting. That night, she invited him to dinner. The table was long, but they sat close. Candlelight traced the outlines of their faces, and the quiet clinking of silverware was the only sound. "You know none of this is safe, don't you?" Isabella said. "Depends on what you call safe. I'm not getting involved. Then maybe I've never been safe." She set her fork down, rested her hands on the table, and studied him for a long moment. "You should leave, Gabriel. Then tell me too." She sighed, too tired to command what her heart had already betrayed. "You don't understand what this means. Here, love is weakness. And weakness comes at a price. Maybe it's worth the cost," he replied. Her eyes drifted away for a moment, and a tear that never fell lingered in the reflection of the candlelight. "You're unbearably naive," she whispered. "Or dangerously honest," he returned. Dinner ended in silence, but the bond between them was now undeniable. Later that night, Isabella found him again in the corridor, when she thought he had already left. They stopped face to face. Neither spoke, but her eyes asked for something her pride refused to admit. Gabriel finally broke the silence, his voice low. "I don't come to you because I want something, Isabella. I come because you remind me of who I was before I gave up." She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and stepped back. "Then forget me before it's too late." He smiled with the calm of someone who already knew that was impossible. "Too late for who?" Isabella didn't answer. She just turned and walked down the corridor, the sound of her heels fading like a heartbeat still trying to resist. When he was alone, Gabriel realized there was no turning back. The mistake that had started with a phone call now pulsed inside him like destiny itself. Isabella D'Amato, the woman the world feared, was becoming the reason he couldn't sleep, and the reason he didn't want to. Outside, the rain poured harder, washing the city lights. Inside, the silence between them lived on, heavy with everything they hadn't yet said. And within that silence, love was born. Not through words, but through fear. Because sometimes, loving someone simply means no longer being able to hide. The weeks that followed felt like a false calm, the silence before a gunshot. Isabella and Gabriel remained close, but the air between them had changed. Her empire, built on secrets and fear, was beginning to show cracks. And someone in the shadows was watching closely. Matteo Ricci, Isabella's right hand, saw what he shouldn't. The glances, the pauses, the trust growing where it never should. He needed no proof. Instinct was enough for a man who knew that power and love never share the same throne. Without realizing it, Gabriel was being followed. Every step, every movement, every visit to the mansion was recorded. Matteo was patient. He waited. He watched. He fed the poison slowly, with the precision of someone who understood the rhythm of downfall. Meanwhile, Isabella became more human, and therefore more fragile. Sometimes soft laughter escaped her lips, brief and unguarded, and the servants exchanged silent looks, as if witnessing a forbidden miracle. She tried to hide it, but power never forgives those who feel. One night, while reviewing reports, Isabella found a folder left on her desk. Inside were photographs, Gabriel entering and leaving the mansion at different hours, talking to people she didn't recognize. Among the papers was a single anonymous note: "He's selling your information." Her blood ran cold. For an instant, the strong, calculated woman vanished. Her heartbeat faltered, uncertain of its rhythm. Doubt came first, then fear, and finally, rage. She tried to deny it, tried to convince herself it was a lie. But the pain of having loved before had made her too cautious, too wounded to trust easily. She called for Matteo. "Who gave you this?" she asked. "Reliable sources, ma'am. And why show it to me now?" Matteo lowered his head, hiding the satisfaction in his eyes. "Because I thought you should know. Before it's too late." Those words, "before it's too late," sounded like an omen. Isabella pushed the papers aside, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. That night, she didn't sleep. She wandered through the house like a ghost, pacing past the windows, watching the rain fall, listening to the echo of her own footsteps. The fear of being deceived again gripped her chest. And even without proof, her heart had already begun to defend itself, like a wounded animal that growls before being touched. When Gabriel's phone rang the next morning, he noticed her tone had changed. Her voice was still soft, but something about it was sharp, deliberate. "I need you to come to the mansion tonight," she said. "There's something you need to see." Gabriel didn't sense the trap hidden behind the simplicity of her words. He spent the day uneasy, unable to explain the heaviness pressing on him. When he arrived that night, the mansion felt different. The lights were dimmer, the corridors quieter. Matteo was waiting in the hall, a faint, knowing smile on his face. "She's expecting you," he said. Gabriel nodded and climbed the stairs, unaware that every step was leading him deeper into the abyss. Isabella stood in the main room, dressed in black, her expression cold and distant. On the table, the same folder of photographs. "Do you recognize these?" she asked. He frowned, confused. "Where did they come from?" "From you." Her answer was cold, merciless. "You're accusing me." "I'm asking you. And if I say I don't know what any of this is, then convince me." The air between them turned electric. The silence was sharper than any blade. Gabriel tried to explain, but she wasn't listening anymore. His voice blurred into the echoes of old betrayals. The past screamed louder than the present. "You used me too," she said, her voice trembling, almost breaking. "Just like the others." Gabriel stepped forward. "No, Isabella. I never. Enough." Her shout cracked through the room like thunder. The guards appeared at the doors. Matteo watched from a distance, the quiet satisfaction of victory in his eyes, the kind only born from betrayal. "Why would you do this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound in control. "Why come looking for me? Why touch what still hurts?" Gabriel stood his ground, his eyes steady though his body ached. "I never meant to hurt you. I came because the call led me to you." "And what does that even mean?" "It means that sometimes fate mistakes love for a trap." Isabella turned her face away, unable to meet his gaze. Matteo stepped forward, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Do you want me to take care of this, ma'am?" His tone was respectful, but the poison hid underneath. Isabella hesitated. Inside her, two forces battled, fear and feeling. The boss and the woman, reason and heart. Finally, she whispered, "Take him away." Gabriel tried to speak, but two men grabbed him by the arms. As they pulled him toward the door, he turned back to her one last time. "You can hate me, Isabella," he said, his voice steady despite everything, "but you can't deny what you feel." She turned her face away, not wanting him to see the tears threatening to fall. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed like a final sentence, but she knew it wasn't over. Matteo stepped forward, his voice low, almost theatrical. "I warned you, ma'am. He's not who he says he is." Isabella only nodded, but her eyes told a different story. There was doubt. There was guilt. There was something Matteo could never understand, something he could never control. Alone, Isabella returned to her office. The folder still sat on the table. She looked at the photos again, but this time, between anger and fear, something else began to grow. Instinct. Something wasn't right. Matteo was too precise, too quick, too convincing. And when the wind pushed against the curtains, scattering the papers across the floor, she noticed it. One photo bore a different date than the others. A small detail, but enough to shift the balance of doubt. The clock read nearly midnight when Isabella lifted the phone. "Find Matteo Ricci," she ordered, her voice steady. "Now." But deep down she already knew it might be too late. Betrayal, like love, always revealed itself when the heart was too tired to fight back. And for the first time, Isabella D'Amato, the woman who controlled everything, realized she was losing control of herself. The next night felt fragile, made of glass, cold, silent, ready to shatter. Isabella walked alone through the mansion's corridors, the echo of her heels sounding like memories following close behind. The walls, once silent witnesses of her strength, now seemed to be watching her. Matteo had vanished. No trace of him since the order had been given. And the longer he stayed gone, the clearer the truth became in the shadows. The traitor wasn't Gabriel. The traitor had been standing beside her all along. In the main hall, the folder still rested on the table. Isabella opened each photograph one by one, as if sifting through the ruins of her own past. There were marks, small errors, mismatched dates, details that now screamed what she had been blind to. Matteo Ricci, the man she trusted most, was the real culprit. The realization struck like a blow. And along with it came shame. The woman who never made mistakes had condemned the only man who had ever looked at her without fear. Outside, the wind howled. The phone rang. A hurried voice on the other end. "Ma'am, we found Matteo. He tried to escape through the old road." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, her face expressionless, though her hands trembled. "Bring him to me." The call ended. The clock showed just past 2 in the morning. The hours ahead would be a trial, not only for Matteo, but for everything she had become. When the car stopped in front of the mansion, the sound of wet tires felt like an omen. Matteo was dragged inside by the guards, filthy, bruised, but still wearing that arrogant smirk. "Mrs. D'Amato," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Still prefer to handle things personally, I see." Isabella faced him in silence, her gaze sharp, her heart pounding with pain. "Why?" she asked softly. Why betray me? Matteo gave a half smile, his eyes glinting with something dark. Because you forgot what fear feels like. And someone had to remind you. The words hit the floor like shattered glass as Isabella walked toward him, each step calm and deliberate. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. You sold the Empire's secrets. You blamed Gabriel to cover your betrayal. Matteo's eyes darted away, unable to meet hers. You were distracted, he murmured. Because of him. The man who came out of nowhere and made you forget who you were. She stopped just inches from his face. Who am I? She asked, her tone a mix of pain and command. Matteo's answer came with a bitter smile. A woman who still believes she can love and rule at the same time. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Isabella leaned in, her voice quiet but deadly. You made 2 mistakes, Matteo. You underestimated me. And you doubted what's still alive inside me. A single gesture from her hand was enough. The guards moved in and dragged him away. Matteo tried to laugh, but fear cracked his voice. He'll destroy you, he shouted. No one survives love, Isabella. The echo of his words lingered through the mansion long after he was gone. Isabella stood still, feeling each syllable sink deep into her skin. Only the fire spoke now, crackling softly in the silence. She walked to the window, her reflection shimmering in the glass. No one survives love, she whispered to herself. Maybe Matteo was right. Maybe love was another name for ruin. Yet something deep within her refused to die. When morning came, she ordered Gabriel's release. The car brought him back, bruised, exhausted, but alive. The moment he stepped into the room, the air changed. He looked at her, his voice barely more than a breath. So that's it. You believed him. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Gabriel's eyes were cold and tired. I trusted you, Isabella, even when everything told me not to. She moved closer, the firelight catching the shimmer of tears in her eyes. I was wrong, she whispered. I trusted the wrong person, and I doubted the one who only gave me truth. He looked away, his jaw tense, trying to swallow the pain. And now? He asked. Her voice trembled. Now, I want to fix what can still be saved. But I don't know if it's possible. The silence between them felt like an eternity. The firelight painted their faces, hers filled with guilt, his shadowed by disappointment. Finally, Gabriel spoke. You know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the fear, or being locked up. It was seeing you look at me like an enemy, when all I ever wanted was for you to see me for who I really am. His words tore through the air like a confession. Isabella closed her eyes, accepting the wound as if she deserved it. I know, she whispered. But when you came into my life, I didn't know how to trust anymore. Everything I touched since then has turned to ashes. She met his eyes again, steady but broken. And still, you stayed. Gabriel took a slow breath. Maybe I understood before you did, that not everything born from a mistake has to end in. The space between them disappeared. Isabella hesitated, then lifted her hand and touched his face gently, like she was afraid he might vanish. Why did you come back? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. 'Cause I didn't call you by accident, Gabriel said softly. I found you by destiny. The words lingered in the room, warm and quiet, wrapping around them like the last light of the fire, closing the circle that had begun with a single call. She smiled, the kind of smile she hadn't worn in years. It wasn't the polished expression of a woman used to command, but something real, fragile, human. Destiny, she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Maybe destiny just needs courage to happen. Gabriel took her hand, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to pause. The woman who once ruled through fear and the man who came from nothing stood side by side. And their flaws, when placed together, somehow felt like balance. The first light of dawn slipped through the stained glass, painting the room in soft gold. Isabella looked outside, breathing in deeply as if the morning itself was giving her permission to let go. For the first time, she didn't fight the weight of her past, she simply let it fall. Gabriel watched her in silence, his presence steady, quiet, certain. They didn't call it forgiveness, and neither dared to name it love, but what existed between them was enough to be both. As the sun rose higher, Isabella understood that pain hadn't weakened her. It had made her alive again. Loving wasn't about losing control. It was about learning that sometimes falling is the only way to be saved. Time passed gently. The seasons shifted, carrying away the chaos they had survived. Gabriel returned to his quiet routine, fixing what was broken, as if mending things was his way of staying whole. The city moved at its usual rhythm, unaware that somewhere inside it, 2 lives had changed forever. His apartment, once cold and hollow, now held a softer kind of silence, the kind that carried memory instead of loneliness. One night, while he worked beneath the dim light of his desk lamp, the phone rang. The sound was familiar, the same tone that had once pulled him into a storm. He looked at the screen and smiled faintly. Unknown number. His heart beat faster, but not with fear. He answered without hesitation. There was no voice at first, only the faint whisper of wind. Then, a breath, quiet, steady. Gabriel. The sound of his name, spoken softly, brought everything rushing back. It was her, Isabella. He closed his eyes and let the moment sink in. "I thought I'd never hear your voice again," he said quietly. "And I thought I'd never have anything left to say," she replied. Her tone was calmer now, warmer, the steel in her voice replaced by something almost gentle. "Where are you?" he asked. "Close enough to see you," she said after a pause. "Far enough not to ruin it again." The silence that followed was heavy, but peaceful. Words would have only spoiled it. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I'm learning to be," she answered. "And you?" "I'm still trying to fix what's left." She laughed, a quiet, broken laugh that still sounded like home. "You're always fixing the world, Gabriel. And me, always breaking everything I touch." "Maybe that's why we found each other," he said, "to see if love can survive what we are." She didn't reply right away. He imagined her eyes, sharp but tired, with that same trace of sadness the years could never erase. "Do you still believe in destiny?" she asked. "After you," he said. "I do." A faint sigh came through the line, and he could almost see her smiling. Then maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. Outside, the city breathed beneath the soft rain. Gabriel stood and walked to the window. Across the street, a black car waited quietly under the flickering streetlight. The window rolled down, and for a moment their eyes met. Isabella sat there, calm and beautiful, her hair loose, her smile filled with peace, and something like goodbye. He didn't move. Neither did she. The silence between them was enough to say everything. And as the rain fell softly against the glass, Gabriel understood that some stories don't end. They simply find the moment where destiny exhales. The phone was still pressed to his ear when her voice came, quiet and trembling, like the last note of a song that doesn't want to end. "This time," she said softly, "it wasn't a mistake." Gabriel's heart tightened, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "No?" he asked, his voice barely louder than the rain outside. "No," she whispered. "It was a choice." The line went silent, but her words stayed, hanging in the air like perfume. Outside, the black car began to move. Its taillights glowed faintly, turning the wet street into a trail of red light that slowly vanished around the corner. Gabriel didn't move. He stood there, watching the space she'd left behind, knowing deep down that some stories don't really end. They just find a new way to exist. He placed the phone on the table and sat down, letting the stillness of the room fill the space between thoughts. The rain outside whispered against the window, steady and calm, as if applauding what had just happened. He reached for a blank sheet of paper and wrote a single line, almost to himself. Sometimes destiny dials the right number with the perfect mistake. He folded the paper slowly, carefully, and smiled. There was no sadness this time, only quiet acceptance, the kind that feels like peace after a long storm. That night, for the first time in years, Gabriel slept without fear, without dreams, without ghosts. because he finally understood what love really was. Not something that needs to last forever, but something that becomes eternal simply because it happened at the right moment. And as the city outside breathed beneath the rain, one truth lingered in the air. Some loves don't fade. They just keep calling in the silence. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications. There are many more forbidden loves waiting to be told.